My daughter once whispered on the phone, thinking I couldn't hear, "She has to go to a nursing home." The words sliced through me harder than any blade. After years of sacrifice, I realized I was nothing more than a burden in her eyes. She thought she was clever, selling what she believed was my house for nearly $900,000 while I quietly stayed in the shadows. But she forgot one detail. The deed still carried my name. And when she returned, key in hand, it wasn't the lock that betrayed her. It was the note I left on the door. I was 68 when I began to notice how fragile peace could be. For most of my life, I had been Eleanor, the school teacher who stayed late to tutor struggling children, the mother who ironed uniforms in the quiet hours of dawn, the wife who saved every penny so her family could live comfortably. After my husband passed, the house became more than wood and bricks. It was the last piece of him, the evidence of our joint sacrifice. Every corner held his laughter. Every flower in the garden bloomed with his memory. Mornings were still sacred. I would pour myself a cup of coffee, open the curtains, and sit with the old Bible he once highlighted in. The words steadied me. On good days, I would write letters to old colleagues or tend to the roses he planted by the fence. The neighbors waved when they saw me kneeling in the dirt, and sometimes children would stop to ask about the yellow roses, my late husband's favorite. Those moments reassured me that life still held kindness, that I was not as invisible as I sometimes felt, but as peaceful as it seemed. A shift had begun. Vanessa, my daughter, had started visiting more often. At first, I believed it was love. She would bring groceries, smile wide, and say, "Mom, you shouldn't be alone here. Why don't you come live with us? Marcus and I would feel so much better if you were with us." I wanted to believe her. After all, what mother doesn't long to be wanted? Marcus, her husband, played his part perfectly. He would kiss my cheek politely, help carry in the bags, and say, "You've done so much for us. It's time you let us take care of you." His words were honey, yet something in his eyes felt cold, as though the kindness was rehearsed. Still, I ignored the instinct. I told myself not to be suspicious. Family is family, I thought. So, I agreed. I packed a few belongings, leaving most of my things behind because Vanessa insisted, "No need to clutter our space, Mom, just bring what you really need." My bedroom at their house was smaller, tucked away near the back, but I told myself I didn't require much. I tried to see it as cozy rather than cramped. At first, I convinced myself it was fine. I helped with cooking, picked up the children from school, and tried to stay useful. Yet, small signs appeared. Signs that I was no longer the mother, but an intruder. One evening, I came back from a walk to find my clothes moved into the closet of the guest room. "We thought it would be better for storage," Vanessa said casually, as though my comfort was secondary. Then came the kitchen rule. "Mom, it's easier if you don't cook after 8, Marcus announced one night, his smile tight. "The smell lingers and keeps us awake." I nodded, though I had always loved baking bread late at night. From that day forward, I tiptoed around the house, careful not to disturb. My routines, my very sense of home, were slowly shrinking. It wasn't just the restrictions, it was the way Vanessa's tone shifted. When neighbors dropped by, she wrapped her arm around me, declaring proudly, "Mom lives with us now. We take such good care of her." They would smile, compliment her, and I would force a smile too. But behind closed doors, her words were clipped, her patience thin. I began to wonder if she saw me as a mother anymore, or simply as an obligation. At night, lying awake in the small bed, I thought of the old house. I could almost hear my husband's voice in the garden, reminding me to prune the roses carefully. I missed the freedom of walking barefoot through my own kitchen, of staying up late to read without fear of being scolded. Most of all, I missed feeling like I belonged somewhere. The realization was slow, but painful. In my daughter's house, I was not a mother. I was not a partner, a guide, or even a welcome guest. I was a tenant without rent, tolerated only for convenience. And yet I told myself to endure. After all, hadn't I endured before? Marriage, sacrifice, loss. I had always borne my struggles in silence. Perhaps this was simply the next chapter of my life. Perhaps all mothers must eventually learn to fade. But somewhere deep inside, something resisted. A quiet voice whispered that I was not fading. I was being erased. If you had a mother like me, could you imagine anyone daring to treat her this way? It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind of night when silence fills every room and you almost believe nothing could ever disturb it. I was folding laundry in the guest room when I heard Vanessa's voice echo faintly from the hallway. Her phone must have connected to the speaker by accident because I could hear every word. She needs to go to a nursing home. I can't live like this anymore. The words hit harder than any storm. My hands froze on the towel. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I stood there, paralyzed, as if my entire body had turned to stone. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, was talking about me as though I were a piece of old furniture that had overstayed its welcome. I waited for Marcus's response, hoping he might defend me, but his voice was calm, approving. It's for the best. We'll figure out the rest once the house is taken care of. The house. Those two words nearly buckled my knees. I pressed my hand against the wall, steadying myself, and forced my face to remain neutral when Vanessa walked past moments later. She smiled at me like nothing had been said. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead I stayed silent. My silence was not weakness. It was the last shield I had left. The following weeks blurred together, but their intentions became clearer with each passing day. I noticed Marcus disappearing into his office with documents, Vanessa whispering on the phone, doors closing quickly when I entered the room. I pretended not to notice, though inside I was unraveling. Then one afternoon, I overheard them celebrating quietly in the kitchen. $890,000, Marcus whispered, his tone laced with triumph. It went through. By the time she realizes, we'll be long gone with the money. I leaned against the wall, my ears burning, my heart collapsing in on itself. My daughter had sold my house, the very place her father and I had built with our bare hands, the place where she grew up, the place I still clung to in memory, and she had done it behind my back, with a smile, as though my life's greatest treasure was nothing more than a business deal. That night, I sat awake long after everyone had gone to bed. I stared at the ceiling, my body heavy with grief, my mind spinning. The girl I had rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose graduation dress I had ironed, had become a stranger. Worse, she had become my betrayer. Sleep never came. Instead, the questions circled endlessly. Had my life sacrifices meant nothing? Was motherhood nothing more than a debt to be discarded when inconvenient? In the mornings, I forced myself to function. I cooked breakfast, I smiled at the children, I watered the plants. Outwardly, I was still Eleanor, the gentle grandmother. But when I was alone, I began to write. My journal became my confession booth, each line a shaky scrawl of pain and fury. I gave them everything. I gave her everything. And now she wants me gone. The journal trembled in my hands as I poured out the words, blotting the page with tears. Sometimes I pressed so hard the pen nearly tore through the paper. One evening, when the house was empty, I retrieved the old photo of my husband from my drawer. I held it close, whispering to him as though he could hear me. "I failed us," I murmured, my voice cracking. "I couldn't keep our family together. I couldn't protect the home you loved." For a moment, I let the weight of failure bury me, surrendering to the grief that gnawed at my chest. But as the candle flickered beside his photo, something shifted inside me. I realized that this pain, this unbearable ache, was also a kind of clarity. I could no longer pretend. Vanessa and Marcus were not misguided, they were deliberate. And if I remained silent, they would succeed. It was in that stillness, in the deepest pit of sorrow, that a new voice rose inside me, not a voice of vengeance, but of survival. What they had done broke me, but it also awakened something I had forgotten I possessed: resolve. And though I had not yet uncovered the full scope of their deception, I knew this moment marked the beginning of a path I had never planned to walk. Because sometimes the darkest betrayal is the spark that ignites the truth. The night after I overheard the numbers, $890,000 still echoing in my head, I could not breathe until I reached for the old tin box in the back of my closet. It had been years since I opened it, a box my husband once told me never to lose. With trembling fingers, I pulled out the folders and began sifting through brittle papers, yellowed with time. And there it was, shining like a beacon through the darkness, the deed to my house. My name, Eleanor Whitman, still stood firm at the bottom in ink that had long since dried. My body went cold, then warm all at once. Relief flooded me. Relief that I was not crazy, that my memories of signing no transfers, of never surrendering ownership, were real. But mingled with that relief was horror. If the house was still mine, then what exactly had Vanessa and Marcus sold? And to whom? I sat back on the floor, the document spread around me, and let my mind replay the moments I had ignored. Vanessa asking once, "Do you remember where the title is, Mom? Just in case, for taxes." Marcus joking at dinner, "You don't want to keep track of that old paperwork forever, do you?" I had brushed it off as curiosity. But now every memory returned, sharp-edged. Pieces of a puzzle I wished I had solved sooner. For the first time, the roles were reversed. It wasn't me fumbling in the dark. It was them who had built their castle on sand. The thought almost made me smile. Almost. Still, I needed more than intuition. The papers in my hands were my shield, but I needed a sword. The next morning, while Vanessa and Marcus were out, I slipped away with the documents clutched under my coat. I drove to the office of Mr. Harlan, an old friend of my husband's, and the lawyer who had once handled our affairs. My hand shook as I laid the deed on his desk. He adjusted his glasses, studied the pages, then looked up at me with a frown. "Eleanor, your name is the only one on this. If anyone attempted to sell without your authorization, that sale is invalid, completely void." I let out a shaky breath, as if I had been underwater for weeks and only now surfaced. "Then what did they do?" I whispered. "Forgery, most likely," he said grimly, "or at best a fraudulent misrepresentation. Either way, they have no legal ground." The truth burned in my chest. All those nights I had felt powerless, all the tears I had spilled, and here was the reality. They were the powerless ones, not me. But I wasn't done. Mr. Harlan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Eleanor, do you know why they would risk something so reckless?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "Because they're desperate. Marcus, especially. His name has surfaced in several debt records recently. He owes more than he can ever repay." My breath caught. The picture sharpened with cruel clarity. It wasn't just greed, it was survival. And Vanessa, my daughter, had chosen to tether herself to his sinking ship rather than to the mother who raised her. On the drive home, my hands clutched the wheel tightly, but inside I felt steadier than I had in months. For once, knowledge was mine. Power was mine. Still, I knew better than to reveal it too soon. That evening, when Vanessa asked me casually, "Mom, did you go out today?" I smiled gently and replied, "Just to the library, dear. Needed some quiet." She accepted the answer without suspicion, and I tucked away the satisfaction of my secret. In the days that followed, I began to prepare. I placed a small recorder in my pocket whenever I walked around the house. Each time I caught Vanessa complaining about me or Marcus snapping that I was in the way, I pressed the button. Slowly, my arsenal grew. The sharpest cut came not from them, but from a neighbor. Mrs. Alvarez, who had lived next door for years, stopped me on the porch one afternoon. She lowered her voice. "Eleanor, I don't know if I should tell you this, but I overheard Vanessa last week. She was on the phone with someone and said, 'I just need her gone. I'm tired of waiting for her to die.'" The world tilted beneath me. My knees weakened, but I steadied myself on the railing. There it was. No pretense, no disguise. My daughter was not simply impatient. She was counting the days until my death. I thanked Mrs. Alvarez, forcing composure, but inside my spirit fractured. Still, even in that moment of devastation, another realization dawned. I was not alone in seeing their true faces. The lies they had woven were unraveling. That night, I wrote one line in my journal. If the truth comes out, it won't be me who loses everything. It will be them. Eleanor realized, with chilling clarity, that the game she thought she understood was far darker than she had ever imagined. Mr. Harlan called me back to his office a few days later, his tone urgent. I carried the papers in my bag, my heart hammering. When I arrived, he laid another document on the desk, one I had not seen in years. "Eleanor," he said carefully, "this is your husband's will." I kept a copy for safekeeping. I unfolded the pages with trembling fingers. My husband's handwriting still carried his steady grace, his signature bold and certain. The words were simple, but devastating in their clarity. All assets, including the house and savings, belonged to my wife, Eleanor Whitman, for the duration of her life. My breath caught. He had entrusted me with everything, not just the house, but the security of our legacy. And I had allowed myself to believe, even for a moment, that Vanessa and Marcus had taken it away. But Mr. Harlan was not finished. He slid another paper forward. "We compared the signatures from the supposed sale of your house. Eleanor, they are forged, sloppy, but enough to trick a buyer who never looked closely." The room swayed. My daughter's name was scribbled in a hand that pretended to be mine. Every loop, every curl, was a mockery of my identity. I pressed my palm to my lips, fighting the sickness rising in me. I wanted to believe this was Marcus's doing alone, that somehow Vanessa was too naive, too blinded by him to resist. But the truth bled through like ink on thin paper. She was complicit. She'd stood beside him, pen in hand, and erased me from my own life. Then came the cruelest twist. Mr. Harlan leaned in, lowering his voice. "I've also discovered something else. Marcus has been involved with another woman. There are records, hotel bills, transfers of money. It appears he planned to use the proceeds from the house not just to cover debts, but to leave altogether." I stared at him, unable to form words. My chest felt hollow, like a drum struck too hard. The betrayal was not only financial, it was intimate, layered with deceit. He hadn't only sought to rob me, he had intended to rob Vanessa too, discarding her as easily as he had tried to discard me. And still, she had chosen him over me. I laughed then, sharp and broken, startling Mr. Harlan. Tears blurred my eyes, but the sound that left my throat was jagged, half sob, half laughter. "This is my daughter," I whispered. "This is the child I carried, the girl I held through fevers, the woman I believed would protect me when I could no longer protect myself. And here she is, willing to forge my name, to steal my life's work for a man who would abandon her the moment the money touched his hands." The bitterness lingered on my tongue. For a long moment I let the grief consume me, mourning not just my husband, but the daughter I thought I still had. Yet even in that grief, something stronger rose. I could forgive the pain she had caused me. Perhaps in some distant future, I might even forgive her weakness. But I could never, ever allow them to win. That night, back in my small room, I chose silence. To Vanessa and Marcus, I remained the dutiful, weary mother, moving slowly, speaking softly, never raising suspicion. But beneath that mask, my mind sharpened. The first step was quiet. I arranged for the locks on the old house to be changed. No one knew but the locksmith, who asked no questions when I told him it was for safety. The second step was preparation. With Mr. Harlan's help, I compiled a folder of evidence: the deed, the will, the proof of forgery, the records of Marcus's debts, the whispers of his affair. Every page was a weapon, every fact a shield. At night, when the house was still, I would light a candle and sit before my husband's photograph. I whispered to him, as if he were still at my side, "Give me strength. Help me do what is right. Help me protect what we built." The flame flickered, and for a moment I believed he was there, watching, urging me forward. My grief had not left me. It clung to me like a second skin, but grief no longer paralyzed me. It moved with me, a reminder of what was at stake. That night, as the candle burned low and the shadows stretched long across the room, I understood one truth with certainty. The life I had known was gone. I was no longer only a mother, no longer only a widow. I was the keeper of a secret that could destroy them. And once it came to light, nothing in our family would ever be the same again. The day Vanessa and Marcus returned from their trip was bright and warm, the kind of morning that seemed too gentle for the storm about to break. They stepped out of the sleek black car, their laughter echoing as though the world had already delivered everything they deserved. Vanessa carried shopping bags, her heels clicking confidently on the pavement. Marcus walked beside her, phone in hand, already speaking of plans for their new home. I watched from behind the curtain as they approached the front door, keys glinting in Marcus's fingers. He fit the metal into the lock with the pride of a man claiming victory, then froze. The key twisted uselessly, catching against the changed mechanism. He tried again, harder, his knuckles whitening. Still nothing. "What the hell?" he muttered. Vanessa frowned, reaching for the key herself, but the lock refused her too. The certainty in her eyes wavered, replaced by a thin thread of panic. Then she saw it. The envelope taped to the door. Her hands shook as she tore it open. The words written in my careful hand were short and final. "This house was never yours. Try your luck elsewhere." Her lips parted in disbelief. Marcus read over her shoulder, and his face darkened like thunderclouds. Across the street, a door opened. Then another. Neighbors, drawn by curiosity, began to gather. They whispered, exchanged knowing glances, pointed. For years, Vanessa and Marcus had worn the mask of filial devotion, parading me in front of others as proof of their goodness. And now, before the eyes of the entire neighborhood, that mask cracked. Vanessa's voice broke first. She wouldn't dare. But even she did not believe her own words. Marcus slammed his fist against the door, the sound echoing down the street. Once, twice, until his skin split and blood smeared across the wood. "Open this damn door," he shouted. But the lock stayed firm, the letter mocking him with every second. I let the scene unfold for a moment longer, then stepped into view at the upstairs window. I stood framed by the curtains, my hands calm against the sill. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they saw me, not broken, not banished, but present and unyielding. Vanessa's eyes met mine, wide with disbelief. "Mom, please, this isn't what it looks like." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence was heavier than any accusation. Then Marcus's phone rang. He snatched it up with bloodied fingers, his expression shifting from fury to dread as he listened. "No, I told you I'd have it. Just give me more time." His voice cracked, desperation spilling into the open. He ended the call abruptly, but the damage was done. Everyone had heard. The whispers grew louder. Debt, fraud, betrayal, the perfect couple, stripped bare. Vanessa turned to him, her face paling. "What did they say?" "They know," he hissed. "Without the house, I have nothing left to bargain with." The crowd was no longer just watching. They were judging. I saw the pity in their eyes for me, the disgust reserved for Vanessa and Marcus. Years of pretense unraveled in minutes. Vanessa stumbled forward, reaching toward the window where I stood. "Mom, please, let us in. We can fix this." Her voice trembled, not with love, but with fear of losing everything. I looked down at her, not cold, not cruel, simply resolute. "No more," I said, the words quiet but final. For a long moment, silence stretched between us. Then Marcus roared, slamming his fist once more against the unyielding door. The neighbors flinched at his violence, and Vanessa sank to the steps, burying her face in her hands. The image burned itself into memory, a daughter undone, a son-in-law bleeding, the facade of family shattered in the street. I did not gloat, I did not smile. This was not triumph, it was truth, and the truth was all I had left to give them. As the sun dipped lower, I stepped back from the window, leaving them in the shadows of their choices. My heart was heavy, but steady. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of dignity return to my shoulders. Because in the end, victory was not about revenge. It was about reclaiming the part of me they had tried to erase. And that, I knew, they could never take away again. The seasons shifted quietly, and with them, my life took on a shape I had not imagined but finally welcomed. Months after the confrontation, the house that had once carried both love and betrayal was sold, legally, properly, and on my own terms. The money was enough for me to choose freely, and I chose a small cottage near the river. It was nothing extravagant, but it was mine, and in its simplicity, I found peace. The mornings there were gentle. I woke to the sound of water moving steadily against the banks and birds calling from the trees. I planted roses in the garden, the same yellow ones my husband had loved. Each time their petals opened, I felt as though I was keeping a promise to him. Vanessa and Marcus, meanwhile, fell hard. Stripped of the illusion of success, they rented a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town. The whispers of neighbors followed them everywhere, how they had tried to cheat their own mother, how they had been humiliated before the entire street. Friends who once gathered at their parties drifted away. Invitations stopped coming. They had gambled everything on greed, and now they lived with nothing but the ashes of reputation. The neighbors who once pitied me now greeted me with admiration. "You showed such grace, Eleanor," one woman told me as I walked along the river path. "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You reminded all of us what dignity looks like." Their respect was a quiet balm, proof that though betrayal had scarred me, it had not defined me. Still, some wounds refused to close. On warm afternoons, I would kneel in the soil, tending the roses. The act was soothing, but also haunting. I would whisper to my husband, telling him what had happened, how I had survived. Sometimes I paused, tears falling into the dirt. For all the strength I had found, one ache remained. Vanessa. My daughter was alive, yet lost to me in a way death could never equal. And no matter how much I told myself I had moved on, the truth was I carried her absence like a shadow. I could forgive myself for believing her lies. I could forgive the years I had wasted in silence. But I could not forgive the part of me that still longed for the girl she once was. That was the one bond I could not cut, the one thread that refused to break. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, I sat at my desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. My hand trembled slightly as I began to write, not to Vanessa, but to her daughter, my granddaughter. "My dear child," I began, "this house may not always be yours, and money may slip through your fingers, but my door will always be open for you. Never fear that you will become like your parents. You can choose differently. You can choose kindness, and if ever you doubt it, remember that your grandmother believed in you." When I finished, I folded the letter carefully, sealing it away for a day when she might need it most. Writing it lifted something from my chest. It reminded me that though betrayal had darkened my family, hope still glowed in the next generation. In the quiet that followed, I reflected on everything. Love, I realized, must have boundaries. Unconditional love does not mean endless sacrifice, nor does it mean surrendering your worth to those who would trample it. My mistake had been believing that motherhood meant erasure. The lesson I carried now was different. Love yourself enough to set limits. Value yourself enough to demand respect. As I sat by the river one final evening, the sky painted in pink and gold, I felt the weight of years ease from my shoulders. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of roses drifting from the garden. For the first time in a long time, I smiled, not a smile of victory, but of release. Because justice had not come through revenge. It had come through reclaiming my dignity, through choosing peace over bitterness. And in that choice, I had given myself the greatest gift of all. The current of the river carried on, steady and unhurried, just like the life I had rebuilt. And as the water flowed, I knew. The story was no longer about betrayal. It was about survival, about strength, and about finally coming home to myself.